Okay, just to make a start then, the starting point of all this is that the attacking game is involved within a framework. I keep hearing a lot of, well, I've for years heard a lot of talk about things like game plan. We tried to avoid that with England, a game plan for a specific game. What we said, look, we're going to play within the general framework of our attacking game with all options available, but there might be just the odd specific point, depending on who we're playing against, that we might focus on in the week leading up to the game. But overall, the framework takes the priority. And the framework is made up of, first of all, flexibility of thought, having players who can handle situations on the field as they change, or in fact, even better, players who can make things change, who can change the course of a game by thinking differently on the feet as the game evolves in front of them, evolves around them. They can actually lead the thinking process on the field without anything coming into them from off the field. So the flexibility of thought, and obviously alongside that then you've got to have players who've got the flexibility to put those thoughts into action. So it means then having players with quite a wide armoury, quite a wide range of skills, so that the thoughts, decisions that they make can be translated into action in any circumstances, in any game. Next point is decision making. The two levels of this decision making. First of all, there's a personal decision making. The player carrying the ball, we said, controls the outcome of what's going to happen next. He makes a decision about what happens next in the game, so that every single player has got to have this ability to read a situation and make a decision and not be frightened, not hide away, not be frightened to get the ball in his hands and do something positive with it. But also, in addition to that, then there's a collective responsibility of players around the periphery to help in the decision-making process. And I suppose an easy way of showing it is, there's your ball carrier in the middle, you've got your little circle around the outside there. Those will be the immediate support players who react to the ball carrier. If the ball carrier decides I'm going into contact for whatever reason, I'm going to ground, then maybe the next couple of players form that ring there saying, it's my job now is to make sure that we clear any opposition off the ball and protect that ball so it's available as quickly as possible. The next little ring round there might be the guys 9, 10, 12 channel. They're the decision makers. What's going to, now we've won the ball, what are we going to do next? Where do we play next? And finally, right on the outside, your players, and I'm talking numbers on backs now, it could be anybody, 15, 14 and 11, the guys on the wide periphery, they might actually have the best view of all of what should happen next. And these guys, their decision is how to communicate what they see into the middle here via these guys. Okay, so the whole thing takes part. So the decision making is not only a personal one, but it's a collective one as well. And if you can get a side with 15 players who are quite happy to buy into the decision making process and competent at it, then it does take the game to a higher level very, very quickly. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the thing. The next one is the freedom to play. If you can develop a side with a wide range of skills and you're encouraging flexibility of thought and action, you must, in my opinion, you must give players the freedom to go out and play. You mustn't stifle them saying, you can't do that today, you can't do that. Obviously you don't want players to make mistakes, but you don't want to stifle them at all in terms of what they can do. However, and this is really important, and I often said to the players when I was with the England side, the more freedom we give you, the more discipline in terms of your approach to the game as a person and also from a technical point of view, you must demonstrate. The more freedom you get, the more discipline, because freedom without discipline equals bloody chaos. And if you can't show the discipline, we'll take the freedom away. It's as simple as that. So it's discipline, freedom to play with discipline, responsibility, more or less all the same sort of things, and accountability as well. You can't just go and throw the ball around willy-nilly. You've got to be accountable for what you do. And of course, now that we've got, and you'll see the pro zone in action, then it's pretty hard to hide in an England game, especially when you're playing at Twickenham. And the final part was, within this framework, from an attacking point of view, for the defence, there was to be no hiding place at all. Wherever the weakness was in defence, we'd search it out. we'd search it out. There is no hiding place for any defenders. And it was fascinating for me. I nearly made a fortune the England-Ireland game, because I was talking in the pub the night before about putting some money on. I said England win by 25, 30 points plus, because Ireland had picked the same team more or less that they picked the previous year at Twickenham, and they'd been destroyed then by England. And they actually, there were 5 players in the Irish team, a third of the team, that can't tattle, that were selected at Lansdowne Road. And what England did, and I thought they would, was search them out in the first 40 minutes and ran Ben Cohen, Johnny Wilkinson and Josh Lucy constantly at these guys. So there were 3 of the front 5 and the 2 half-backs who cannot tattle, and just destroyed the defence in the first half by doing that. So, you know, again, within that framework, there might be specifics going from game to game. I might say, look, these guys have picked, and I know for a fact from the '95 World Cup, in the semi-final New Zealand-England, that New Zealand identified Jerry Guscott as being the weak link in England's defence. And if you remember, very early on in the game, after Lomu had trampled all over Mike Catt, I think, for the first try, New Zealand ran a tap penalty from their own 22, and they're only 1 score in front, and they ran straight down the 13 channel, broke away and scored a try almost the full length of the field. So there are, again, specifics. Well, it's a general thing, no hiding place for defence. There might be some teams say, look, this guy cannot tattle, we need to run our best runners, not our biggest, our best runners at this player, so we can get him behind the defence or so we can expose him. And finally, in the attack, just as important, there's no hiding place for our players. It's no good attacking. I'll just go back 2 years, South Africa. I think there's some clips coming up of the test match. South Africa at Pretoria, first test that England lost to a controversial penalty try not being awarded. Come half time, I'm not going to name the players because it would be unfair. After the first 40 minutes, we'd been attacking with 13 men. Now, attacking with 15 men at whatever level you play is hard enough against 15. To attack with 13 against 15 is almost no odds whatsoever. And what had happened, because we said we want to play the game very, very quickly to tire the bigger South African forwards out, is that we had played it exceptionally quickly, but 2 of the forwards, and the same 2 for the whole 40 minutes, had chased the ball around the field and arrived at every contact area just as the ball had been won, and off it went somewhere else. So effectively, they'd actually done nothing at all the whole game, apart from appear at scrums and line-outs. So again, there's got to be no hiding place for our players, and that requires game understanding, which is something, again, that I'll go on to. Okay, so first component, obviously, of any attacking game, and these guys, I reckon the front 5 players are the most important players in anybody's team. I don't think anyone can argue that, because by and large, they set the platform through the set pieces. Not necessarily the restarts now, because they become bare, but certainly a set piece for the foundation. Okay, Alan. For the foundation of the game. You get your scrum right, you produce quality possession, next one. Produce quality possession from scrum ball, and produce quality possession, not just win ball, that's not good enough. Produce quality possession from scrum ball, line out ball, at least you've got a chance to put your attacking game into operation. And these were, and again remember, this was developed about 2-3 years ago over a period of time. Whether they're still operating to these targets or not, I mean, it is irrelevant, it doesn't really matter. You set your own depending on how you feel and what players you've got. But at scrum ball, it's 100% quality possession. It's got to be on your ball. Okay, line out, 90% quality possession, which maybe that should be 100 as well. But especially now the line outs become far more contestable and contested, then I think 90% on your ball is pretty good odds. Restarts is an interesting one, because the restarts is to win 80% of all restart balls. That's when you kick off as well as when they kick off. So it's not just when we receive restarts, it's when we kick ball off as well. So it's 80% of restarts there. Okay. And just as a, there's no pause button on here for some reason, so I couldn't pause those stats at the end, but they pretty well matched up to sort of world-class performance stats, apart from the area of restarts. And obviously 80% is a massive target to aim for here. What I've just got here are the restarts from New Zealand and England. You can count yourself, or look yourself at where England were trying to kick. In fact, they lost that one there on a rebound, which they will be cross about, I will think. I could put the video up as well, but it's very distracting. It's a lot easier to see. Looking at the areas that they're kicking into, the players that are going there. Mike Tyndall is a massive chaser for England because he used to be an international schoolboy high jumper. So he's a logical choice to use, not a forward, because he can out jump a forward without any problem at all. Again, winning your own ball from your own 22 enables you to clear territory on your terms rather than just whacking the ball down the park and giving it straight back to the opposition to counter-attack against you. Press it again. One more. Fine, thanks. So of 6 restarts in that game, England won 5. 5 out of 6 is 80% plus, is it, if my maths are right? Which is a massive up from the 2001 stats from there, where it's, I can't remember exactly, it was around 33–40%, I think. So that's, you know, it suddenly throws up different complex on your attacking game altogether. You're actually getting the ball back when the opposition scored. Instead of kicking it straight back to them, you're kicking it straight back to your own team, and off you go and play again. Okay. It's all right. Just moving on then. The next part of the game was the ability to control the ball for long periods of time. There's a combination here in terms of controlling the ball and controlling territory. And obviously, it's not that difficult. Well, I'm saying it's not that difficult. It's relatively straightforward to control the ball and play sideways across the field. In fact, a lot of teams do it. The key element to controlling the ball is that you must, at the same time, you must go forward. You've got to get the defence on the back foot and the attack on the front foot. And the two elements here that we're really focused on was, number one, we've got to win the contact area, obviously. But instead of just saying we've got to win the contact area, we've got to say, how are we going to win it? And there were 3 elements that we developed. First of all, obviously, technically, every player's got to be really competent in the contact area. And the interesting thing became, over the 2 or 3 years we worked on this, that some of the best contact players, especially in terms of protecting ball on the floor and clearing players out, became the players that played in the wide channels. Because they know, going back to the freedom with discipline principle, if we were going to attack and the first attack was going to be 70 metres away from where the ball had been won, if they couldn't win the ball, then that would be it. That part of the attack would disappear from the game. So they become incredibly competent, technically, winning it. Attitude, obviously, is another one, in terms of sort of the physical, mental hardness, sorry, not the physical hardness, in winning ball of all 15 players, or all 22 players. And the other one too is the intelligence part of winning the ball. The players not going into the area if they're not needed, players not going into the area and giving penalties away, staying the right side of the law, but being able to operate the technique and attitude using the intelligence in that area so they don't lose their heads, so they don't, under massive pressure, do something that they shouldn't do and give penalties away. And the other one here, and this was a really contentious issue with me and the other coaching staff, was never force the play. You know, my thought was, whether it was right or wrong, how the hell do we go forward if we never force the play? I mean, go forward, I don't mean go forward, go from here to there. I mean, go forward in terms of our game. And I know at the moment England are working really hard on offloading the ball. You remember Robbo did that session at Worcester. I think in the Australia game, I can't remember whether he told you or not, but I looked at the stats on here, there are 22 offloads in the game they played against Australia before Christmas, which is a massive number at international level. And I think now that even though this is still in existence, don't force the play, I think the players are getting a little bit more freedom now in terms of if they think the offload's on, to go for it. This all came about against South Africa at home 2 years ago, when England had just taken the lead and Will Greenwood had scored a try and tried to offload a ball running out of his own 22. and it went to a South African. He explained it, he said, I saw an England player, if he caught the ball and the player dropped it, we could have scored at the other end. Now, it's where you draw the line then. You say to the player, you must never do that, which is what some of the coaching staff said, you cannot offload balls inside your own 22. My argument is when you've got players who can bloody score from 100 metres out, then you offload it wherever there's a possibility. So, well, that's the philosophical. Okay, and the next part of control, obviously, is controlling territory. When we sort of introduced this, there was a massive misunderstanding on this. Massive, and it was probably just as much my fault as it was the players' fault. It may have been even more my fault than the players. And the very first time we talked about that, in the next game, we did nothing but kick the ball down the field, because that's what territory meant to them. We've got to gain territory. What we've got to do, we've got to whack it down the park so we're in their half of the field. That's not what we meant at all. What we meant was, if you go on the next one, we wanted to play to field position. Now, by and large, field position means getting to positions on the field whilst we're still in control of the ball, where we can operate a strike. Okay. So, how do we do that? Well, we go back to what we've just seen. Our first objective is to control the ball and go forward. And that might mean, if you're playing from your own line, playing from your own 22, you're playing through a number of phases. The objective of the exercise was, Helen, to kick if we had to, when it was correct to do so. Now that's a player's choice, that can't be a coach's choice, because you're not out on the field and things change completely as the game develops. But the key thing was, if we were close to our own line, the easy thing, especially with a kicker like Johnny Wilkinson on your side, is say, okay, we'll just kick the ball straight off the park, and he'll kick it 40, 50 metres, and it'll be a line out. I know it's their ball, but at least it's around the halfway line. And they were actually given that choice, depending on the situation they felt the game was at. Let's say we were 1 point in front, there were 30 seconds to go, then you wouldn't be so desperately keen on them playing through 15 phases in their own 22 before they whacked it off the park. Just get it straight off the field and finish the game. Obviously there's got to be, you know, lots of element of common sense on this. But what we really wanted to do in terms of our kicking game was to kick when we felt it was right, i.e. kick when we were still on the front foot, and kick when we got the defence going backwards. So we tried very hard to play from our own 22. And in fact we used to spend at least one 20-minute session each week before a test match specifically on playing from our 22, from scrums and line-outs in different areas of the 22. How are we going to play our way? And if there was a target, the target was to our own 10-metre line before we kick. Because if we kick from our 10-metre line, you actually pin, with a good kick, is pin them right down in their bottom corner. Just with those last two there, the build the score one, obviously we felt if we got 7 points in front, the opposition has to score twice. To get 14, they've got to score 3 times, including, by and large, I suppose it's 2 tries, etc. So that was important mentality the players had to have. And that's why, the last clip I think we saw, it was 5-0 against Scotland. We'd blown 3 tries in the first 12 minutes 2 years ago against Scotland, so we could have been 20 points up. We'd only got 1, we were 5 points up. And it came to that stage where they were just going to take a tap penalty, and Martin Johnson said, hang on a minute. He said, we've been here once too often, we've only been playing 10 minutes, let's just get some points on the board. So we just take the penalty, so we're 8 points up. They've got to score twice to get in front of us in the early part of the game. So it's, again, it's sort of that building that score, keeping that pressure on the opposition. Whenever they look at the scoreboard, they think, shit, you know, we're more than 1 score behind now. We've really got to work hard to get back in front again. Okay. I mentioned discipline part of the framework, and the 2 areas of discipline that we're focused on. First of all, obviously the personal one, is to try and keep 15 players on the field. I mean, in the modern game, bloody yellow cards seem to fly around like confetti, and you know, you can put your side under massive pressure if you get players yellow carded. So the key thing from the personal discipline point of view, is to keep the whole 15 on the field. And also that means if that's happening, it's more likely that players are focusing on the process of what's going on the field rather than taking any notice of the distractions around. I was quite interested to talk, I was talking to Rob Andrew, I'm sure he won't mind me telling you this, I was talking to him downstairs before we started today. He was saying that their last home game, Newcastle beat Leicester, is that right? Beat Leicester. And he said that Mark Andrews made the biggest contribution to that game, literally by just hanging on to Jono's shirt for 80 minutes. Not literally hanging on, but figuratively, just being a pain in the, excuse my French.
What cheating was it?
Sorry? I've no idea. Well, it doesn't matter, does it? Because eventually, apparently, Jono got so pissed off he was swatting him away, that and the other. And that's the sort of thing, you know, that try and focus on the process, ignore those distractions, so the personal discipline. And the other one, appropriately enough, is the one we talked about, or you talked about this morning. The absolutely vital part for the team of working with, not against, not complaining, working with the referee. And again, you'll have special players, I will think, in your team, and I think it's worth coaching players to talk to referees on the field in the right way, because it can make a massive difference. If the referee feels that you're on his side, that you're trying to play the game so that he can, so it helps him, it makes a big, big difference. You know, the players have got different ways of doing it. Jono, I suppose, is a massive knowledge of the game, but physically is an intimidating character as well. Whatever referees might say. Matt Dawson's a bit more theatrical, etc., which probably turns some referees off, but he's calmed down a hell of a lot. And you know, it's really making sure that all 15 players work with and nobody against the referee. The last thing you want is to get the referee offside, as it were. Okay. Next part here is execution. And obviously the target became, right at the very end, was 100% accuracy in every single thing that was done. That was the target for every single player. And obviously with this pro zone thing where you can throw up stats left, right and centre, it's very easy to monitor this. But 100% accuracy. First of all, in the basics. Now, as far as the England game is concerned, the basics are the ones we started the video, the PowerPoint presentation with. Number one basic is defence, which we're not concerned with today. And the other three are the scrums, the line-outs and the restarts. So, and the next one is the core skills of the game. The core skills being running, handling, tackling, contact skills, kicking skills as well. I think it's very, very rare, I would imagine, for anyone to hit 100% accuracy in all those, but at least if you want to play at the very, very top level of the game, it's a target that's got to be aimed for. And the other thing in terms of execution was, and I mentioned this earlier on, again it buys into this theme of working with a referee, and that is keeping the penalty count into single figures. And it's, again, knowledge of the game. I mean, I know when I played the game, I had no idea of half the laws, I don't think. I think certainly within the England setup now, because they've had a referee with them for the past 3 years, they're pretty knowledgeable about what's allowed, what's not allowed, etc. And coaches talk to referees. I think it was mentioned this morning, not only after games but before games as well. I don't know whether you get that facility or not, to be able to talk to a referee and say, look, is there anything you don't want us to do today? And he said, fine, we won't do it. Just keep the referee on the side, and obviously if we did give penalties away, no kickable ones. So if you give them away, you give them, depending on who you're playing, 50, 60 metres out. Okay. Right, this is, from my point of view, I think this was the most interesting part of it, was development of our game once we got away from scrums and line-outs. And I just called it sort of a broken play structure. And I think I was probably responsible for developing this more or less on my own to start with. So I'm talking about play to space. What I meant there, play to space between, I don't actually mean between defenders, playing to that space there. I'm talking about the understanding of playing in this space. If these are attackers, this space here, understanding the use of space between the attack and the defence. Because again, if you're asking players to play sort of in a multi roles, you might sometimes get one of the back row, the front row, whatever, suddenly slotting in at first and second receiver. It could be that all the space you want to play in is out here. Now, if these guys have no understanding of what to do to keep these defenders in this part of the field, then it doesn't matter how many players you got out there, you're not able to use them. So this understanding of space between yourself and the opposition is really, really important. The next one was space, obviously, play to space, outside the defence, behind the defence, and I think behind the defence and through the defence. Behind the defence is an interesting one because, as you know, England have got a kicking coach, Dave Allred, and for years we've been desperate to get kicking into the England attacking game. They've been fantastic in training, and they never used to do it in the game at all. But now it's starting to come in that a little bit more, because with a modern day flat defence across the field, putting the ball behind defenders can cause, especially against the side, not every side plays with sweepers, can cause all sorts of problems. And as we'll see as we go through this, it's interesting. Most teams have one, possibly two principal kickers. The more kickers you can get, and I know England are working towards having 7 backs and hopefully a couple of forwards who can kick in broken field, because you know, if you have players all over the field that can kick, it causes massive problems for defences. If not, then they can just target on the one kicker. Okay, next one was play with width. I think this is probably the most misunderstood concept that I tried to introduce. If I just draw the pitch, we literally said at every stage in the game, every single stage in the game, want a player on that touchline and 70 metres away, because that's the width of the pitch, want a player on that touchline. Okay, whether they get the ball or not and who it is to start with is irrelevant. Because my argument was, and I might be completely wrong on this, but my argument was and still is, if a defence looks up and sees a player stood over there and a player stood over there, immediately they're thinking, why are these players there? And once you've got the defence thinking they're on the back foot mentally, you've got on the front foot, they're on the back foot mentally. Obviously, when I say it doesn't matter which player it is, depending on what happens next, it becomes more important, because I think, as we saw in the autumn internationals, I think Robbo mentioned in Worcester, that for 10 minutes, England playing around this part of the field, sort of 60 metres out, worked, I think in a 10-minute period, worked 3 overlaps, and the man on the outside every time was Jason Leonard. You know, now he's not the man you back to run 60 metres and score a try down the wing, and if it had been someone else, it had been James Simpson-Daniel or Ben Cohen, I think the other 2 wingers who were playing, there's half a chance that would happen. So that, again, there's a lot of game understanding, intelligence got to be built into this, which is built in over a period of time. But the basic principle is to play one player on each touchline. I went even further with that and then backtracked, because it caused a lot of problems, which I think I'll come to in a minute. I said, if that's a 5-metre line and that's a 15-metre line, I said we ought to aim to play 2 players either side of the field in the 15-metre channels. That still leaves 11 to play inside, inside 40 metres, which to me is still pretty good odds. So that's the width issue. I mean, this actually came to me very strongly about 6-7 years ago, just before the game went professional. You'll remember that Wigan played Bath at Rugby Union Rugby League. We got totally destroyed at Main Road, Manchester, largely because it was boys playing, that's us, playing against men in terms of athletic development. They were bloody frightening when they ran out the tunnel, because they looked like real athletes, not like rugby players. But real athletes are about 16 stone, you know, and we look like shriveled up little lads. But also at Twickenham as well, we played rugby union against them, and in the last 10 minutes of the game they scored 3 tries, 2 of which started behind their own post, and the only reason they scored them was the fact that they got players out here, and all our defence by that stage of the game was so tight, it was just marking quite tightly, as they did in every Premiership game they played, in the middle of the field, because they'd never come across this before. And you know, in that back division was Twigger Marley, Henry Paul, Jason Robinson, Gary Connolly, people like that. You give them a bit of space on the outside and you're dead and buried. So it suddenly sort of dawned on me then that, you know, here's an opportunity to possibly open up our game and make it far more difficult for defenders. If they've got to defend 70 metres width, then it's a lot more difficult than defending, as you were saying then, Patrick, probably you're talking about 35 to 40 metre width that most sides play with. It'd be interesting to look at sides, you know, at whatever level, because I reckon a lot of teams still play the sort of start off sides at a scrum here, and you've got 9 and 14 out there, probably opposite second post around that area. If the game moves into the middle of the field here, then it'll still only be that area, or maybe that area, that the team fills. It sort of moves around the field in boxes of 35 to 40 metre widths. You know, and with the way defences have been developed these days, and tackling technique and the fitness levels have gone up, to tackle a side that's only playing in that amount of width, to defend against a side, sorry, is probably the job of 10 men. So if England had done that against Ireland, they could have hidden the 5 non-tattlers, and England would have gone nowhere. So again, it's a question of trying to move the defence, stretch it around, expose individual players. The other thing was, if you're playing with width like that, well, we started off playing with width, so you'd have 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 there, okay? We had to consider, if we're going to get some pace on the game, we had to consider the issue of depth. Now, when we first talked about depth, what it meant was 10, 12, 13, they said, oh, if we need to play with more depth, we'll go back here. So you've got 10, 12, 13, which of course brings the tattle line way past getting over the gain line there. So we then developed a system of the 2/3 lines of attack, which is probably pretty well documented. The front line of attack is those 3 players, 9, 10 and 12. That's the front line of attack. The second line of attack, I'm just putting numbers in here, 13, 14, and other players that might be around that area. I'm doing something a little bit more specific on this afternoon with the Newcastle lads. And I've put 2/3, your third line of attack, of course, should be your number 15. And that is the one reason why I personally think makes Ian Bolshaw such a special player. Because he's the only fullback I've come across who can play as a third line of attack, who can roam around the field looking for space and then just hit it very late and communicate it to the guys in front of him. He's the best talking fullback I've come across. So again, there's a communication issue there. But obviously you need depth to put pace on the game, for these guys to be able to read what goes on in the front line of attack and react to it, etc, etc. And next one, Ellen. Underpinning it all, and this is where, when it does fall down, it falls down big time, is that getting the right numbers of players into the contact area, because that is the underpinning element of playing with width and depth, using the whole of the pitch. Again, can't be set in stone that, but I sort of worked on the principle that if you're trying to play quick ball, if you need more than 4, at maximum 5 players in the contact area, then there's something either badly wrong with your players' technique or something badly wrong with my coaching. I mean, obviously there would be a difference there if you'd attacked through a couple of phases, defence was spread right out across the field. You might want 8 players in the contact area to lift it and drive it, a pick and go through the middle, but that's a tactical decision that's made as the game unfolds and has developed. But by and large, looking for the numbers to contact area, sort of 4 or 5. Because what we found, or what I found when I first started doing this, was 2 things might happen. First of all, we'd play from there, let's say play into here, okay? And because the concept of width was in players' minds, and it was a newish sort of concept, all these guys who'd be involved in the scrum of the contact area would just step back here. All these guys out here would say, oh geez, we've got to keep width. They'd stay out there. And suddenly, the ball carrier going to a tattle, he'd be on his own. But nobody followed him, nobody being there at all. That was the one problem. The other problem was totally the opposite, where you go from here to there, and all the players in this contact area would follow the ball in here, and a couple of guys would go in there, and suddenly you got 8 to 10 players in the contact area, and maybe a player stood out here, somebody stood out there, and nobody in between. So getting that balance right took quite a while, but it was this understanding of players. Do I need to go to the contact area? What contribution can I make? And just harping back to that South Africa game where 2 players ran around the field for 40 minutes. I mean, Jesus, the workload running wise must have been phenomenal, but they actually made no contribution to the attacking game at all. understanding when I need to be there. Work rate obviously part and parcel of it, and the game understanding. Am I required? And the next contact area, if it's 50 metres away, what should I do next? Do I need to go over there? Will I make a contribution? Will I arrive 10 metres away from that contact area, running sideways across the field, and the bloody ball comes out and goes past me again, going the other way? And it does happen quite a lot. And obviously part and parcel of this too is, if you're playing with that sort of range of options, etc., then there's got to be a balance to your game. And we did have this range of options, and the players, apart from maybe the odd thing we'd identify before the game, depending on who we're playing against, were by and large free to operate these range of options within the framework that we're playing. Obviously the selection of options is the key thing. They've got to be the decision makers within the game, what's going on. Communication was an issue for a while. If you're playing with 70 metres of width in front of a 75,000 crowd, and the players in the outside channels are the guys that are totally unmarked, as you'll see on Pro Zone right at the end of the presentation, you can get 3 or 4 players completely in 30 metres of space, but they're never spotted. So the communication issue again is another one. And as I said before, the balance of the thing is always led by play to space. Wherever the space is, we play to space. We don't play to contact unless it's absolutely necessary. Try and play to space, get on a player's arm, get on his shoulder, get in behind him, offload, play through them, or whatever. The biggest danger in all this is the next one here, and that is it turning into a 7-a-side game. Because you're playing with players out wide, a 7-a-side game, the ball is just passed laterally across the field without interesting the guys down the middle of the park at all. Remember, somewhere along the line, that diagram, if you've got your players out here, what you want to do is try and concentrate the defence down this middle here. So there's got to be some form of confrontational rugby, and these were the bullet points that were worked out for this. First of all, we've got to learn to apply pressure on the defenders all the time. That's effective pressure, the pressure that worked. We've got to counter pressure with pressure, and by that we mean if you're under the cosh, and this really is confrontational, if you're under the cosh, you've been stuck in your own 22 for the last 5 minutes or so, and suddenly you're given a penalty, the natural instinct I think of a lot of players would be, thank God for that, we'll have a rest, we'll put it down the park into touch and start the game again. That was totally opposite to the mindset that we wanted. We said if you get awarded a penalty your own 22 and you've been under the cosh for 5 minutes, you bloody tap and go. You go straight back at them because they won't be ready for it, and that really is putting the pressure on the opposition. Next one, had to play direct rugby. I mentioned the no hiding place again. That's a no hiding place to defend. As you've got to run, we've got to play, go forward in that direction. Even if we're playing there, we must go there. We must confront the defence, ball in hand. I think one of the most, well, I don't know whether it's the most difficult skill or not, but one that seems to disappear completely, or almost completely from the England game, is to have a player who can run that way and pass that way over a distance of about 10 metres at pace. It almost seems a skill that's completely disappeared from the game, that all the players who pass in either direction have got to go up and then step that way before they let it go. So I mean that, again, you know, if you start developing players with that ability to hold defenders and put the ball 10 metres away to someone else, it'd be fantastic if we've got some midfield players coming through our game that could do that. And obviously again through power running, the sort of thing you saw there, actually bursting through the holes between defenders and offloading ball is very confrontational as well. It's saying to the defender, you can't go away. You know as defenders, because presumably you coach defence, that defenders are told to point and shout, I've got so-and-so, you know, turn it round. Let's have the attacker say, I'm bloody running at you. There's nowhere for you to go. I'm coming at you straight away. Okay, I'm going to run at you and make you tackle me. Be different. I actually put bottle in brackets there because that was a word I used when I first talked about this with England backs. We actually had a move, and because of videos these days, nothing's a secret, so it doesn't matter. And we called it bottle, and it became sort of a word that we use, having the bottle to play. Because I said you won't use this. It'd be a great move, but you won't use it because you won't have the bottle to do it in the middle of a game. The next game, you've seen the try already against Italy where Ronnie Reagan scored in the corner, where there's a scrum here. And I said a 15-metre channel, left-hand side of the field, 9, 14 or whoever goes out there and stands, and Austin Healy being Austin Healy, I'm going to be rude here, ladies, so if you want to listen, it's entirely up to you. Being Austin, I said to him, I'll bet you won't go and stand off the pitch. And he did, he went and stood off the pitch on this, the touchline, and I had an argument with the touch judge. The touch judge said, if you come off the pitch, you can't go back on again without the referee's permission. And I said to her, well, what do you say to him? So I told him off and stayed there. So I thought, well,